Our opponent has taken a mulligan, but I think we want to keep this. It's close. The fact that our opponent's taken a mulligan means mulliganing this is more reasonable. There's not a ton we can do with the hand. Alright, let's take a mulligan. And of course we're going to have to go ahead and mulligan again here. But our 5 is decent. So we are going to keep it. And we'll see what we're up against. Oath of Jace, we'll go ahead and top that. Being able to flip our Jace Vryn's Prodigy early is definitely nice. So our opponent's leading on Evolving Wilds. So we can match that land. Interestingly, our opponent's drawing. That means that probably the card that they scryed was something they wanted to keep on top. And I'm going to go ahead and grab a Plains here. We can play our Vryn's Prodigy on turn 2, right when we want to be playing it. And next turn we can play Oath of Jace. So, not a bad mulligan to 5, but still a mulligan to 5 nonetheless. So our opponent is playing Bant. It looks like Bant humans, so there's Thalia. So we can kick things off here with a loot. And now we're gonna play our Oath of Jace and try to construct our hand. So we drew into some big spells here. Emrakul is something we're pretty far off from being able to cast. I would lean towards discarding it here. Narset is a card that we also might have difficulty casting. I think we can actually discard the Languish here, because we do have 2 copies and the Jace to potentially flash one back. So we can do that. That is going to give our opponent some idea of what's in our hand, though, which is a little bit unfortunate. So this could be something like a Dromoka's command to get rid of our Jace Vryn's Prodigy. Okay, so it is a Dromoka's command. But we're going to take this. So here we are forced to put our player stream into play tapped and pass the turn back. And our opponent's going to get in for 4. So, okay, here's a Tireless Tracker. So we are going to get a chance to cast our Languish here. And this is going to put us in reasonable shape. But our opponent does still have 4 cards in hand. We can now jam our Ob Nixilis and get rid of our opponent's Tireless Tracker, which is pretty nice. And now we're going to get our Scry 1. So our opponent did have a follow-up tracker, but we can bottom the Choked Estuary. It doesn't come into play untapped in this spot. So got a few different lines we can take here. Think we actually want to just get rid of our opponent's Tireless Tracker with this Silumgar's command. This isn't optimal by any means, but getting this tracker off the board is going to mean that our Ob Nixilis is still on the board. And so it just makes sense here. It also stops the tracker from growing, grabbing more clues, and we can put our opponent's only forest back in their hand. Here's another Thalia. We don't actually need the Dark Petition right now. So we've got a couple of options here. We can actually just cash this Ob Nixilis in to get rid of our opponent's Thalia, which I don't really mind. Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. And now we can safely land Narset, which is what we've basically been waiting to do. So we see a land on top, so we don't mind just shuffling that away with our Evolving Wilds here. And just passing back. We're in great shape this game. Here's a Reflector Mage, so Reflector Mage isn't that good against our deck. Just so few creatures to actually be able to bounce. And it looks like our opponent's actually going to make us sacrifice this Oath of Jace, which is smart. It's going to stop us from scrying. We actually found a Grasp of Darkness on top of our deck, but rather than casting that, we might as well just go for Sorin here. Get it into play. Get rid of our opponent's Reflector Mage while gaining some life. And that's going to be the game. And we saw just how easily the Planeswalkers were able to take over once getting our opponent's creatures off the board. So, looking at the sideboard against Bant Company, we may want to board in Kalitas, although they tend to keep in some Reflector Mages. I actually don't really like Liliana the Last Hope in the matchup. I'm fine with boarding in our Duresses because of Negates and Collected Company. So I think that the Dragonlord Slumgar can go. And we can just play this sort of leaner game. We can also board out a copy of Dark Petition. I'm fine with boarding in the Kalitases, even though our opponent is gonna have Reflector Mage. So I think this is a good configuration. We can also, yeah, I think this is right. We're gonna keep in all 4 Oath of Jace. So we have Duress and Transgress now after sideboard. But we are still relying on Languish, and we have Languish in our opener, so this is going to be a hand we're going to be looking to keep. And remember, that last game was a mulligan down to 5. But it didn't feel like that. Sometimes the Planeswalkers can really just dig you out from a big hole, and we saw that in the last game. Alright, it looks like our opponent does have a Thraben Inspector to kick the game off here. Thraben Inspector is nice because it just replaces itself. So if we kill it, our opponent's still got the value from it with the clue. And here's a Dustwatch Recruiter. That may flip, although we drew a Jace Vryn's Prodigy, which we can now play. And that's going to stop our opponent's Dustwatch from being able to flip right away here. So we're not really, there's no real downside to making this block here, so we're going to block the Thraben Inspector and take 2. But now the Recruiter is going to flip. And we can play our Oath of Jace. This is a perfect time to do it. We have a basic land, so if our opponent does play a Thalia, we still have an untapped land we can play next turn. So got another copy of Jace in hand. I think we can discard one of the Prairie Streams and probably this excess copy of Jace. So let's do that. And the nice thing about Oath of Jace is it scries, but it also just refills your hand, and it's an enchantment that goes to the graveyard for Emrakul later on. Alright, here's a Tireless Tracker and a clue, so our opponent's gaining some card advantage here, definitely. So I think we may want to just go ahead and try to flip our Jace. And rather than casting Languish this turn, our opponent also has mana up for Negate, which is worrisome. But yeah, let's go ahead and fire off the Transgress the Mind. So we hit a Thalia, and our opponent does indeed have a copy of Negate in hand. As well as a Knight of the White Orchid. So we can pass the turn here and then flip the Jace once our opponent does attack. But the Negate is going to be a rough card to work around. What we would really like to draw is something like a Duress. Although we drew Kalitas, that could be a card we can use to our advantage here. We're probably not going to have time to cast this Oath of Jace, so we'll just discard it. And we are going to get a Scry, but we don't want that Prairie Stream. Alright, let's go ahead and see what this Kalitas can do. we're in a rough spot. And we can't. If we had tried to land the languish there, it would have gotten negated, and that would have just been absolutely terrible. So this tireless tracker is getting really big here. It's basically a 5/4, but we plussed our Jace on it, so it's got 2 less power when attacking, but it's still, our Kalitas is not able to deal with it effectively, so we're just going to have to take this damage however much our opponent decides to deal us. We do have Ruinous Path though, which can be used as an out to the tracker. And there's a Descend Upon the Sinful. That's an interesting card to see on top of our deck. The issue is not that it's good, because it would be very good in this spot. It's just whether or not we're going to have time to cast it. I think we do put it on top, and we hope that we can get to that stage where we can cast it. We can play the Languish out, or we could attempt to cast a Ruinous Path. So I think we actually go for the Ruinous Path here on the Tireless tracker. And we can potentially flash the Ruinous Path back if our opponent does counter it. So there's the negate. But now we have our land drop. We can tick down the Jace and actually get this Tireless tracker out of the way. So that worked out pretty well for us. Our opponent's Recruiter is going to flip back. And there's a Recruiter activation. And it looks like our opponent found another copy of Tireless Tracker. But we're actually looking good here. Now we're able to untap and play one of our mass removal spells, which is exactly what we want to do. We actually don't need this ultimate price right now. So we drew a land. That is good news. So we can actually go ahead and attack with this Kalitas right now. And our opponent's pretty unlikely to block it. So, no blocks. We can sack our zombie. And now follow up with this Languish, which is just going to be a huge blowout. And basically should win us the game. Because it's going to create 4 2/2 zombies. And that's just such a huge play. Even though our opponent has a bunch of cards in hand, our board has all of a sudden swelled. Here's a Collected Company. Our opponent's looking for a Reflector Mage. Was able to find it and Athalia's Lieutenant. So the Reflector Mage is likely to bounce our Kalitas. But we still have all of these zombies left in play. And don't forget about the Jace. We still have plus Oath of Jace. It looks like our opponent has another creature to play here. So at this point, we don't really need the lands. We can scry those to the bottom. This is an interesting spot. We can simply grasp of darkness away 2 of our opponent's creatures and start getting aggressive if we want to. There's also Sorin though. And I think we just go ahead and land Sorin. When you have an opportunity to get a Planeswalker into play, you usually want to take it with this deck. And next turn we can replay the Kalitas if we want to. Right now we've got 4 card types in our graveyard, which means that if we choose to cast Descend Upon the Sinful, we do have Delirium, so we will get that 4/4 White Angel. And our opponent really, even though they can do stuff to prolong the game, I don't see their avenue to victory at this point. The Lambhole Pacifist is going to be able to flip here, but we're going to get to scry too. We can scry both of the lands to the bottom. And we drew a land. Our opponent does have a lot of mana available. I think we want to try to get this Kalitas back into play, so let's do that. We can tick up our Sorin here. And we actually have the option of casting this Grasp of Darkness. So let's go ahead and cast it. We'll see if our opponent has a response, which they very well could, but we'll try to get rid of the Lambholt Butcher. Okay, that's going to work. Interesting, so our opponent may not have anything in hand. We can go ahead and flash back this Grasp of Darkness. On the Reflector Mage, and that's going to work. So the coast is now clear to attack our opponent, and it looks like our opponent's just sitting on air, no Collected Company, and this should be the game, I would think.